Greetings to the brothers. This is Wayman Brown back again with another video. Always it's a pleasure to be back with you all. Be sure to check out the links in the description. Of course, my website, the esquireproject.com, the self-enterprising site helping black men to eliminate barriers to personal achievement. We've got some new articles up. Also, be sure to check out the link to the Facebook business page, which is where I've actually been promoting my work as well as the content of other brothers who create work for us in black male media. If you'd like to support the work, it's always appreciated in advance. Salute to you all. And I'll be sure to go ahead and leave either the Cash App and or PayPal link down below. We're going to pick up where we left off in our last series of How to Think to Live. This is actually going to be part 2, the power of your perspective. So let's get into it. A few years back, I took this local TV production class. And one day, one of the instructors of the class told us that the goal of television is to be in the business of controlling people's minds through smoke and mirrors. He put it just like that. Now, he illustrated this by showing us some footage that he had captured shooting a commercial for a local church to help the church get some new membership. And at this particular day of his filming, he noticed that the church didn't really have enough people in the seats to meet the goal of promoting the church as an attractive place of worship, particularly to get younger crowds in. So what this gentleman did is he did a little bit of trickery, and he masterfully inserted dozens of people into the footage from some other filming that he had done at the church on another day. Now, when he showed the final footage to the class, one of the students actually attended that church, and he stood right up and he said, "Wait a minute, wait, hold on. That's my church, and I was there that day. All those people weren't there." The classroom instructor replied, "So, what about it?" To which the student replied, "Man, you can't be doing that. That's not even real." And the instructor quickly redirected his focus to the point that he had made earlier to us about crafting imagery for TV, by saying that, well, the footage says that they were there, so they were there. There weren't enough people in the seats, so I put them in seats. People gonna see what I want them to see. You see, in this day and age, people are constantly digesting edited images of people, edited images of situations that shape their point of view, usually without them even paying attention to it. Celebrities and your public figures, they're always working their magic, of course, because they're carefully crafting well-timed actions, whether it be in a photo or video, or well-timed rehearsed responses and interviews to portray the sort of image that they want people to buy into. And when those captured moments are coupled with recounts from their peers about how they really are, the public then gets a sense that they really know these people. And then they feel comfortable with classifying them as either good or bad, as humble or arrogant, as brave or cowardly, or forthright or dishonest. Now, there's this photo of Obama holding an umbrella over a woman while he's walking with her, and I think he was like walking out of a helicopter. And I remember when it first came out, a lot of his supporters looked at this as an example of him being a gentleman and as an example of servant leadership, really as if it's unusual for a person to walk down the street and share an umbrella with somebody that's walking with them. But a moment like this gave their beliefs legs to stand on, to help substantiate their view that he was nearly a saint, despite his fallacy in office like any other president has. Now, meanwhile, when you look at Trump, this dude could basically do or say anything that could be unflattering, and granted, he may have more of those times than he'd probably even care to admit himself that we all observe. But the thing is, they can take those same instances and where he's caught doing or saying something that isn't the greatest, while not even considering anything that he has done within his role as president, and basically use that to shape him to being the devil. And I'm not a supporter of either one of these men. I'm just using them as examples of the smoke and mirror effect that my TV instructor at the time was talking to us about, and how easily it's used even in people's real lives when evaluating people and situations. So your personal perspective is incredibly powerful because it really shapes your attitude about what takes place in your life, and it strongly influences your quality of life and your daily affairs and your overall journey of life. I think back to 2007. I was working at this hotel at the time overnight, and I got off. I think I was working like an 11 to 7 at the time. I was about to drop one of my coworkers off. He was a dude, was a cool dude from the job. And it was in the middle of a very dark and snowy, bitter, cold, winter in Buffalo. That's basically how the winters are. Pretty much the sun starts going down around 4 o'clock. Doesn't really become daylight again until like 7:30, 8 o'clock the next day. So I hopped in my then 94 Burgundy Buick LeSabre, and I unlocked it for my coworker to get in. Now, when I sat down, I noticed a real strong draft when I sat down in the car after I closed the door. And I looked around and I saw I had fresh snow on the back floors of my car. Then, of course, I look and I see that my steering column is broke, right? And I look and see that the glass window on the back door was broke and my briefcase was gone. Oddly enough, there was some empty pizza box with a bunch of napkins on the floor. And, of course, I realized that somebody had broken into my car overnight. So my coworker, he briefly acknowledged my misfortune. He went ahead and called a cab to get home. I stayed and filed a police report, had my car towed, and then within a few days I had to get my steering column fixed and, of course, repair my window as well. Now, a few days later, maybe like 3 or 4 days after this, an officer actually came to my door with my briefcase, which only had, some books and pens and a notepad in it, nothing really valuable. And he told me that they caught the guy who did it, and that this guy had a record for breaking into cars. And, if I wanted, I could press charges or whatever I wanted to do. I didn't pursue it. I was just like, I got my car fixed. I got my stuff back. It is what it is. And I was just glad to not be too inconvenienced about the whole situation. Now, I remember I mentioned this to my father right after this happened. And he was a lot more bothered by this than I was. And it was my car, right? But one of the first questions that he asked me was, how do you feel about having somebody violate your stuff like that? And much to his surprise, and perhaps even to my own at the time, I told him I really didn't feel violated at all. Now, my father was a little bit concerned because he thought I was just being a little bit too passive about the situation. But the thing that he didn't realize was that my concentration wasn't even on feeling violated. It was really on the bizarreness of the whole event. Now, first, the thing about this whole thing was that to me, there was nothing personal about this situation. Have you ever found yourself daydreaming about something while somebody was trying to get your attention, and they might even be calling your name, trying to flag you down, waving hands in front of you, and you just walking, and it looks like you're looking in their direction, but you're just not paying attention. And then when they finally catch up with you and you snap out of it, they're like, didn't you see me? You was looking right at me. Were you ignoring me? I don't see how you couldn't see me. I was right in front of your face, But of course, you like, nah, I didn't see you. I'm drifting off in La La Land. I'm daydreaming, whatever. I wasn't paying attention, even though it appears as though I was. See, that's how I viewed the state of mind of a car thief who did what he did that night. To me, this was basically a bum who was doing what he does on any other night. He doesn't really have a consciousness about what he's doing. To him, all he knows is if I see a car and I can try to steal it, then I'm going to try to steal it. And my car happened to be one of the ones, if not the one, that was in his line of sight that night. And that was the one he chose. One of the things that I've always noticed about my own perspective on things is that when something doesn't really seem personal, it doesn't really bother me as much. Now, it doesn't mean that I excuse it, but it just means that my feelings surrounding the events that take place are not usually that dramatically negatively impacted than, let's say, if it was a situation where, it was a disloyal woman or a fraudulent friend who betrayed me, who betrayed my trust or my loyalty. Those types of situations are a lot different. They will bother me a lot more to where, I would probably be relatively consumed about those things for a certain period of time because it's a very deep sort of a wound to me. And I can find myself even well after the fact occasionally still bothered by it. Now, wouldn't it be great if we learned to transfer all of our skills from one area to another area? Most of us would pretty much be unstoppable if we could do that. And that's ultimately the goal, right? But of course, life is a constant work in progress. So when it came to this whole car incident, I was able to mostly brush it off and accept the loss. I was, if anything, more upset about the money that I had to spend on repairs out of my own pocket due to somebody actually violating my stuff. That was what bothered me more than me personally feeling violated. The other thing that I noticed about this whole situation was that over the next few days after it happened, instead of being angry, I spent most of my time being very curious about the whole thing, because there were so many unusual things surrounding the whole thing, right? As I mentioned, I looked and there was a pizza box in the back seat with a whole bunch of napkins, and my briefcase was gone. And I really tried to understand the state of mind that this thief had to be in to sit in my car, I guess, and eat some pizza while he's trying to break in. I'm like, was it really just this comfortable that night downtown where he just decided he could just like get a snack and just chill and eat a slice of cheese pizza? And I say that facetiously a little bit, but at the same time, I'm really thinking about, like, was that just how it was? Did he decide that I'm going to just chill here and just leave my garbage here and not even have the decency to throw it out? And then, of course, there was the whole thing about my briefcase, because, like I said, when the officers caught him, they actually said that he had it with him. And this is like 3 or 4 days later. So now I'm really kind of tripping like, wait a minute, this dude was carrying around my briefcase for like 3, 4 days. He had enough time to see that nothing was valuable in it. I just had some books and notes pads and, some pens, nothing, no laptops or nothing like that. Why was he carrying it around for days? Like, did he get stuck on a chapter in a book that he liked reading, or what happened? The whole thing was just very bizarre. And I just noticed that was where I spent most of my attention, and my perspective was basically shaped by my concentration. And when you really pay attention to yourself, you'll realize some of the things in life that you think will make you tick don't, and then some things that you think won't will. So in this situation, I could have easily gotten angry and very frustrated. Those could have been my default responses to someone trying to steal from me, right? But instead, my greatest allies ended up being my curiosity and eventually my humor about the whole situation. And so that actually brings up a couple of points. One is that when you're trying to shape your perspective on something and get through life, with a clear head as best as you can, try not to allow situations to occupy more negative space in your mind than necessary. And a lot of times your physiology will tell you how much something is really upsetting you. But see, your ego is telling you that you should have a reaction that seems more appropriate for the situation. But listen to your body, listen to your heart, listen to your mind, and see what that tells you. It doesn't mean being a pushover, but what it means is not letting situations that are out of your control get the best of you any more than they have to, if they have to get to you at all. So one of the best ways to start shaping your perspective that works in your favor, so that you can start becoming a good student of yourself and keeping notes on, what makes you tick, what doesn't, etc., is to start accumulating as much data about yourself in your head, or possibly even written, and becoming a stellar student of you. When I did this, basically, over the years, as I've done this, I should be saying, one of the things that I know about myself is that, and I think this kind of gives me an advantage in certain situations, is my outlook on certain things when it comes to things that I was totally responsible for. I actually have absolutely no issue whatsoever dealing with things, even if they're very severe, if I know that I was the only person involved, and not saying I ever want to blame anybody else, but I literally, to an extent, really enjoy the thought of being able to place the consequences of life square on my shoulders, whether those are wins or whether those are losses. But I also appreciate the losses, and I've had a lot of them, as I'm sure you have as well. So I actually really enjoy being accountable for what happens to me in life. For one thing, it teaches me a lesson And of course, as a man, we want to constantly shape ourselves into degrees of, our exercising our wisdom and growing into being a sage of sorts. Not only to help ourselves, but also other brothers as well as other people whom we love and whom are part of our lives. And I know that certain things are going to take place in my life where instead of me being an example of something that's favorable, I'm actually going to be like a warning example of what not to do. And I'm very much so okay with that. I accept that life treats you fairly, and sometimes life can be a real bitch sometimes. And it seems as though you can't really catch a break. But at the same time, even when things happen, I still look at it like the universe must think I'm pretty important to keep testing me, to keep on throwing these monkey wrenches at me, to see how much I can actually withstand. And also, it's trying to give me some wisdom with all these different circumstances that I'm going through. That's another good habit to actually get into, is to look at any unfavorable situation, as unfavorable as it may be, to welcome the experience, to look at all experiences that are things that are actually meant to leave you with some sort of wisdom, that are meant to give you some sort of a teaching tool so that you can become a better version of yourself in your future decision making and your future processes of life, and so that you can also, perhaps even more importantly, save maybe tens or hundreds or thousands or even millions of other people a lot of pain and distress with your knowledge, because you come to become a much trusted resource based on the things that you go through and learning from those things and being able to accumulate a wealth of information. So make a connection with your experiences being part of something larger than your present circumstances. So these occurrences that we go through in life, while troublesome a lot of times, they're also deposits into our large treasury of knowledge and our treasury of wisdom and foresight and leadership. Deal with the things that you brought upon yourself by sheer negligence or even by your own ignorance. Understand that life sometimes will make you pay, but life is always going to make you pay in proportion to what you deserve a lot, even if you don't think that you do deserve it. Embrace the lessons and be grateful that you can actually live to tell them as well. You see, the perspective, it actually has to be trained up. It can't just be left to its own devices. And if it is, then life will end up just being something that keeps happening to us instead of something that we learn to truly leverage to work in our favor. Not too long ago, I was going to an appointment right here in my city in Buffalo, going downtown, and I parked my vehicle at what's called a parking ride, which is basically just the public transportation, like train stop, where you can, park your car and then just hop on a train, and you don't have to pay for the parking when you do that. So the train ended up having a delay, and I was just basically trying to save some money on the parking fees, because they can get expensive. And I'm like, well, I got time to get down there, so I can just hop on the train. But there was a delay, and the delay was starting to make me late for my appointment. So I went ahead and I called up an Uber. Now, of course, me calling this Uber defeated my entire purpose of avoiding, downtown parking, because now the Uber was about to actually probably be about just as expensive, if not a little bit more expensive, than if I would have just went and parked. So the Uber driver showed up within a few minutes, probably like 3 or 4 minutes. He must have been, just a few blocks away. And it was a brother, and we started up a conversation. And, I was very mannerable with him, as I am with everybody, or at least I try to be with everybody whom I meet, especially if they're performing a service for me. But he could probably see a little bit that I was a little bit frustrated with how my day got started, even though we were having a friendly and cool conversation. But it ended up being a real good convo. And he actually brought up something about business that he was looking to get into. And it turned out that I had a ton of information on his business to share with him. So he was all ears, and I gave him everything I had, about what it is that he was trying to figure out from the time that, our ride lasted. And he told me that he had actually been trying to research some of this stuff that I was talking about for several months, but he really couldn't get a lot of straight answers about certain things. So I was glad to be able to help him in that way. Now, during the course of the conversation, I started incrementally adjusting my outlook about my day, right? So first I'm looking at it like, man, I'm inconvenienced. This ain't cool. I got to be somewhere. Now I'm spending money that I was trying to save. But I decided that my perspective for this situation should be a lot different. And I actually decided that I should be looking at this like me and this brother, we were actually supposed to meet and supposed to have that conversation that morning, because I ended up becoming very helpful to him with something that he had been trying to get some information on. And I also decided that instead of being frustrated with running late and spending money that I was trying to save, that I should be glad that there's even services like Uber around to help me and to help other people who are in the need, and there's other places where people just don't have those types of conveniences in different parts of the world. And some people can't even afford to even get an Uber if they were running late to something that was important, you know? And I had to also look at it and say, well, you know what? Let me be grateful over the fact that I'm putting money in another black man's pocket. And since I'm a person who always preaches self-enterprise, and that's one of the biggest things that I advocate within my work, to take that Swiss Army knife approach towards the marketplace and towards life in general, always being equipped to be able to take care of yourself, provide for yourself, developing an arsenal of skills, etc. I had to look at it and say, well, I can help him do that by supporting what he's doing by being an Uber driver. This is helping him out. This is helping his family. So he ended up dropping me off at my destination, and thankfully I actually got there about 2 minutes earlier than I would have had I actually caught the train anyway. And as we wrapped up the conversation, I shook hands with the brother and I thanked him, and he said, I don't want to charge you for the ride. Don't worry about it. So I said, no, man, I got to pay for the ride because, like in Uber, they charge you once you get to your destination. He said, no, man, I'll make money later on. I erased this trip. He said, all I want you to do is just give me the highest star rating. I said, man, I was about to do that anyway, man, because, professional, what I'm saying? We had a great conversation. You was here on time. I was going to look out anyway. But he was like, man, that's all I really want, man. I said, man, I become the sort of person, I feel kind of strange when people do things for me sometimes. But this is, again, was another example where I needed to change my perspective, because the words that came out of his mouth was, you bless me, now let me bless you. You see, one powerful thing that you can do to help keep an appropriate perspective about things is to realize that each scenario in life will present some sort of an advantage and opportunity for you. We should always be looking for the seeds that are waiting for us to be planted for a great yield. Everything that's happening is happening to help us find some sort of positive about the scenario. Now, that's oftentimes a lot easier said than done, and it can feel like it's even unreasonable at times, depending on how traumatic life situations are that we deal with. But remember, the perspective has to be trained up. Again, it's not something we leave to its own devices. So what better way to start training up the perspective than when it comes to very small occurrences of life, such as the one that I experienced with that Uber ride that morning. Things that aren't really going to take any skin off your back, but things that you may notice that you've had like a default reaction or a default set of emotions that weren't the most empowering over. Instead of doing that and getting bent out of shape, let's start looking at these things as being seeds of opportunity that we're actually planting into our goodwill investment that's going to end up paying off for ourselves and other people later on. Another thing that this Uber example highlighted is that we have to be aware that other people also have their own perspective on a situation that we may not realize. And that while our interest may be to assist people in what we understand and what we believe to be the right course of action, we have to allow each person to work things out in their favor, even when we don't see it. And that, again, is the example of him finding value and getting a higher rating, which is going to make his reputation, much more substantial to attract more business over a long term than him just worrying about, whatever it would have cost, the 14 or 15 bucks that day for the ride. That wasn't really that big of a deal for him. Other thing you have to be aware of too, though, is be aware of people who are attempting to shape your perspective. Because for nearly anything a person says, there's most certainly another vantage point to look at instead of the default contextual point of view that you may resort to just seemingly naturally, just because of the way that you've trained yourself to look at certain things based on things that you hear or things that you see. And this is people now actually performing their own smoke and mirror effect in our lives and our conversations. So let me just give you a few examples. A person may want you to believe that the only way to achieve results that you want in life is to own every hour of your time without having to answer to an employer. Now, that's a philosophy basically. And while being able to leverage your time without having to answer to a boss has a ton of benefits, and of course, I, along with other brothers, I know Ramil is one of them, we encourage entrepreneurship. And of course, that is something that I think pretty much all of us should be aiming towards in some way, shape, or form, whether we support ourselves fully from it or not. But just in trying to use that as the parameter for looking at, this concept of time freedom and lifestyle freedom, you still may not have enough time to do what you want to, simply based on the bad habit of not prioritizing your life's affairs properly. So just like when a person hits the lottery for several $1,000,000, that doesn't guarantee them long-term wealth. And they oftentimes even go broke within a few months or maybe just a couple years most. Having more time by default does not guarantee that you're going to be any more accomplished or any more happy than if you would have had a more restrictive schedule. Even more so, it can be just as easily concluded that, let's say, if you make better use of your time and consider applying something like the 80-20 rule, which is basically a theory that subscribes to the idea that 80% of your outcomes will be based on focusing on the 20% of things that are going to get you your best yield on your efforts. If you actually use something like that and really scale down to what's the most bang for your buck activity that you need to be doing to get to what you want, you may very well be able to do more than a year of proper focus, even with the time constraints, than if you have 5 years of just sitting back, kicking it, sipping margaritas on a boat and watching movies all day. And then, of course, we have to consider, or we can consider for our perspective, that time freedom is relative, since even if we have all the time in the world, our lifestyles are based on how we prioritize things. And there's still only 24 hours in a day. And so only a certain amount of things are going to end up getting accomplished either way. Let's look at another example. When a person tries to sell you on the idea that they're a good example of how to succeed as a family man because they've been married for, let's say, 20 years or so, or 30 years or more. Perhaps they are actually successful as a family man. That's possible, right? But it can also very well be concluded that this person simply is continuing to remain married despite the fact that the household, from his spouse to his kids, is a complete train wreck, and that they simply remained in a marriage for a certain amount of time. That doesn't mean that they are successfully married. They're not any more successfully married just because they've been married for a certain amount of time than a person should consider themselves ambitious just because they've stuck around at the same job for the past 5, 10, 15, 20 years or more. Some people just put it in park and just do the same thing over and over again based on a routine instead of actually showing substantial progress. Let me give you one last example. A lot of times, especially when I think about rappers, a lot of times they give you, the sob story of how they came up in the hood, and it was drugs, it was guns, it was violence and poverty. Like, pretty much most of us didn't grow up in the hood anyway. Like, that's, the vast majority of us. We grew up in inner cities, right? And they oftentimes try to make it seem as though they've overcome something so grandiose because of the circumstances. But whether it's a rapper, whether it's just anybody talking in conversation like this who wants you to buy into their struggle story, and they very may actually have one, right? But a lot of times people who grew up in the hood weren't necessarily people who were involved in street culture. They weren't necessarily involved in drug culture. They weren't people who were outside like that anyway. A lot of these people were in church. A lot of these people in the house before, street lights came on, or just made a beeline between school and work and home, whatever it was. And they avoided a lot of situations that they could have been actually exposed to had they actually been involved in the environment a little bit more. So don't always just buy into the whole thing of, well, I grew up in the hood, so that's supposed to mean something. Like, we pretty much all grew up in the hood for the most part. And even if you did, most inner cities are connected to a very large metro area of some sort. And that metro area typically has initiatives in place, whether they be programs, whatever have you, that can help you succeed financially, socially, civically, and with business opportunities and employment opportunities, oftentimes within that same zip code or maybe just a couple away. And a lot of times those resources are there to help you come through and survive and thrive out of your situation eventually. And then in addition, even though I'm not really one to do the comparison thing all like that, occasional gunshots and needles on the ground might be a much better deal than being born inside of a war-torn area where by the age of 8 or 9 years old, you forfeit any chance of enjoying your innocence as a child because you're pretty much trained to be a killing machine by then. So again, we can pick and choose how we want to put things in a perspective, can't we? I think back to the very sad and unfortunate event of September 11th in 2001. I was 17 years old at the time. I remember it like it was yesterday, when 4 planes were hijacked on U.S. soil. It was the first time in my lifetime at that time where the United States rather felt vulnerable and felt touchable. Now, 2 of those planes crashed into the World Trade Center, and 1 of those planes crashed into the Pentagon. The 4th plane was known as the United 93 or Flight 93 of United Airlines. And that plane was believed to be heading to the U.S. Capitol building or the White House as its target. Now, they had 33 regular passengers on this flight. They had 7 crew members and the 4 hijackers on the plane. Plane takes off at about 8:42 in the morning. At 9:28, the hijacking began. The hijackers were able to keep the passengers and crew under control by telling them that they had a bomb on the plane. Now, one known used weapon that we know that they did have were the box cutters. Some reports still speculate on whether or not a bomb was actually on the plane. Now, between 9:28 a.m. and 9:57 a.m., the passengers had to literally make a life or death decision, one in which they probably never been confronted with before. And they had determined that they had to do something because they had got word that planes had crashed into the Twin Towers in NYC. So, of course, during this time, they're probably experiencing a host of emotions that none of us have ever experienced. Petrified would be the absolute least to describe how things were. Anger would be an insult to say. Scared is an insult. And by roughly 9:57, they made a determination that there was only one choice, which was to attempt to stop the hijackers from their plans by attacking them and attempting to get in control of the plane. So they rushed the cockpit, and there was a struggle that took place between the passengers and the hijackers in the cockpit. There are many audio recordings that are available of the ordeal, and some people have even concluded that the passengers either got into the cockpit or that they may have actually killed one of the hijackers who were guarding it. Nonetheless, just likely being within a couple minutes away from interfering with the hijackers' plans, the plane ended up nosediving and fatally killing everyone on board, despite that last heroic attempt by those passengers. Every time I think about that flight in particular, one thing that stands out to me about the whole sad and sickening incident is the timing. If you've ever been on a flight, then you probably get some jitters as the plane takes off. You know, especially if it's like a rainy day or a stormy day, you get some nervousness. You know, severe weather can make you kind of antsy, turbulence. The ride may not be that smooth. And of course, when you're on a plane, all you really want to do is just get to your destination safely. You know, if you've never believed in God and you start feeling that plane shake, that might be the first time you ever said a silent prayer. But these passengers really only had about 30 minutes to make a decision. They had a decision to wait it out and see what happens, or to do what they did right before the end. And of course, that was a lot to process. From the realization that this crisis was actually taking place, to trying to contact their families, their loved ones, to maybe hoping the hijackers would change their mind, maybe even wonder if the whole thing was a dream, wondering if the government was going to be able to interfere and stop and help. But a major part of what kept them from acting, likely even sooner than what they heroically did, was that fear and that uncertainty, that fear of the unknown, that imminent threat of what if they actually do have a bomb on the plane. But when that survival skill really kicked in, they decided that however it goes, win, lose, or draw, we got to do something. And they did. And there was an interview conducted with the martial arts expert following the United 93 plane crash. And the martial arts expert mentioned that they actually had one of the hijackers as one of their students, who they did not know, of course, was going to end up being a hijacker. But at the time, they were just one of their martial arts students. And this person was the one who actually took over as the pilot. And the martial arts instructor was explaining how he would share with him, as well as the rest of his class, that one of the philosophies that kamikaze pilots used in Japan in World War II in order to go on these suicide missions to attack opposing forces was because they trained themselves to focus on conquering something without ever doubting themselves. And the martial arts expert also expressed that he trained his students, including one of the eventual hijackers, how to take control of situations and to make a person do what it is that you want them to do. And that's exactly what we're up against every day. There's a psychological warfare going on every day to get us to live in a state of fear, to live in a state of being dominated by the opinions, ideas, the convictions, and beliefs of other people. And even being held to our own self-destructive ones. My brothers, may wisdom always be with you.